Unscripted. KSU. Quick, tactical conversations from the heart of the power sports industry. In this business, time is torque. So hit the ignition, twist the throttle, and let's fire it up.
Take one.
Mark Sheffield, episode 23. We have a exciting interview today. I know you've been talking nonstop about it. You're super excited. Someone you followed for a while. I'm not even going to try to introduce him. Let's just bring him right on and have him introduce himself. The pod clock is not on today. We don't need the pod clock today because it's going to be a fascinating conversation. We're extremely excited about it. David, please introduce yourself and
you got
as
it.
much as you want. You can go as long as you want because you have a fascinating background too.
No. My name is David Brown. I'm the host of Business Wars, which recently made a transition from Wondery, which was a huge podcast house purchased by Amazon a couple of years back, and now we've been folded into the larger Amazon Audible brand. So I just got a message from our producer who's in Boston a couple of minutes ago, said that we're going to start now transitioning out of saying Wondery at the end of our program. We're going to start saying Audible. So that's going to be a new thing for us. But Audible, obviously a huge brand in the podcasting space, and audio. They're the kings of must-hear audio. So it's a real thrill to be part of the Audible team now. And I know a lot of that kind of stuff has been happening in the power sports space too. But in any event, I'm just really honored to get a chance to talk with you guys. And fire away, because to be honest, I feel like this is an opportunity for me to grow and learn more about what you're dealing with. But this is coming from a guy who loves motorcycling. I mean, I first time I got on two wheels, I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it was during the mini bike craze that I'm sure some of your listeners will remember. The mini bike craze was in the early 70s, and these were like small wheels, like little tractor wheels, right, with a lawnmower engine. And everyone was building them, and you could buy them at hardware stores or at gas stations, right? You didn't have to wait around for Honda to come out with something cool. You just bought one of these, lawnmower-powered mini bikes. And man, it was the essence of riding pleasure, especially if you're 7 years old. You thought you were Evel Knievel on that thing. And here's the thing, those forks were not solidly mounted, so if you tried to jump something, you would see your fork go way off in the distance as you came planted down like that. I can't tell you how many times they were not safe vehicles, but they instilled in me a kind of joy for two wheels that never went away, and I know that there's been a big challenge in the power sports business, getting those young people in, getting them excited and building up the next generation. So, I'm thrilled to talk about anything you guys want to talk about. Let's rock and roll.
Good. Well, we go back and forth with questions. It's a pretty easy format. Mark, kick us off, though. What's your first question you got for David?
Dave, I don't even think you did yourself enough justice, though. And just to point out right before this, I used the researcher's best tool today, Gemini, and just looked, and it says that you've done about 2,400 podcasts to this point. And I think we're around 20, so you've got us by, a factor of 100, which is pretty crazy. And, I never even wanted to do a podcast. Kyle bugged me to do this for a year. I've lived all over the world. I've got this mutt accent that I've got a little British lisp in there, and there's some words I can't say. And if I pronounce my own last name, people don't even know how to write it down. And I can't even order a cheeseburger because when I say the word cheese, nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. And then I like universal sign language. I'm like, I got to milk the cow and then, whatever it is to make cheese. So
did you say England there? Am I going to have to call you Mark Sheffield? Mr. Sheffield?
You can, my lord, that works just
my
fine
Lord,
too.
That works better, yeah, right, my lord.
Yeah, whatever makes you happy. But we've I've participated in a bunch of podcasts in the last year, I would say, at this point in time. And I've got a couple of other guys, Brian Tierney from Lightspeed, who we always kind of joke around that he has probably the best podcast voice in the world.
Yeah.
And, I think Kyle does a pretty good job, and you've got a very memorable voice. I mean, I listen to Business Wars, and your ability to go in and out of different voices and kind of speak to different people is really, really interesting. But I wanted to know, because I know who has my favorite podcast voice, but who has your favorite podcast voice?
Oh man, that's hard. There are so many wonderful voices, and I have to say that I grew up in the era of, I mean, obviously podcasting wasn't a thing when I was growing up. It was very much the DJ, and the great newscasters of the day. And so when I got hooked on audio, in a way, I was listening to stuff like, the BBC and tuning in, and I really got addicted to the romance of radio, which is basically like non-on-demand podcasts. I mean, that's the way I think of radio and podcasting. In a way, they occupy the same space, but for radio, it was whatever you got when you turned on the dial, and that was magic to me, that we could talk to each other, across time zones in the world. And I really fell in love with shortwave radio. And I remember hearing a guy named Alistair Cook, who was a BBC reporter who did this thing called Letters from the U.S. or Letters from America. And he was based in New York, but he spoke on the BBC World Service. And he spoke in a way, it wasn't that he had some crazy great voice. He spoke in a way that was like a storyteller. Like no matter what he said, it was once upon a time, right? And then it continued. And by the way, that's a real secret of telling your story in business is remembering that all stories begin, even if you don't say the words, they begin once upon a time, right? All good stories do. But I digress. It was Alistair Cook that I really got hooked on. And that in turn got me hooked on news and I guess what you could call journalism in the old school way of thinking about journalism. But then as I went up through the ranks, and I did a lot of national and international reporting over the years, I found myself, after a couple of decades in this business, I found myself doing business journalism. And again, the strength of telling business stories is that once upon a time element, and the program, which is called Marketplace, it had a real swing to it. It was fun. You didn't have to be a business type person to enjoy, what Marketplace was about. In fact, we kind of poked fun at the numbers and all of that stuff. We kind of, as the British would say, took the piss out of it a little bit, and that was really an exciting experience. I went on and started working because of my family, and I was getting engaged to someone, and I was moving to Austin, and they were in Austin. I found myself at a local radio station in Austin, and we started producing a show on Texas music. So I started out in news. I started doing business news. I got into doing music journalism of all things, but of course, Texas music is just, it's a mother lode of stories. And today I host a Texas daily business program. It's an hour-long program that's heard statewide. And so that's one gig. But I think, my main gig is what evolved into Business Wars. And I have to tell you, man, I wrote a thesis paper back in 2004 during my journalism studies that was on how podcasting would never take off. So please don't look it up. Wow. Please don't. But I could not have been more wrong. So I say that as a kind of preamble to whatever we talk about here. Take it from me. You can't take it from me. I cannot predict the future or anything like that. But I love business. I love business stories, and I'm especially fond of branding. I love branding. I think that's a pseudoscience unto itself. It's not a pseudoscience. It's a real science. But, there's so many different theories on it. It's fun to kick around ideas in branding, and I love doing it. That was
Great
more of
answer.
an answer than you thought you were going to get, isn't it, Mark?
No, I think you kind of speak like I speak in my mind.
Yeah, I just let it flow.
Yeah, I'm good with
You've
that.
got a better control button than I do, that's for sure.
I was
I'm
told a
gonna
couple of months ago that I ask impossible questions because I wrap my questions in 3 minutes of
sure
personal
do.
story.
That's the way to do it, man. That's great.
I'm pretty direct here, so let me just
Yeah,
mine
go for
are
it.
not as long as Mark's, but I'm gonna jump right into the power sports industry based on past industry. So, what patterns from past industries usually signal that a disruption is about to hit? And do you see
Boy,
any of those signals in the power sports industry today?
that's the thing about disruption. You don't see it coming. I mean, that's the thing. Um, when there's the easy answer, the short answer is always the one that you see in the rearview mirror, right? So if you think
Hmm.
about other disruptors, way before disruptor was a thing, a company like Nordstrom was in a way a disruptor. What Nordstrom did, and something that I think a lot of people have forgotten about, certainly since it became a sort of staple in shopping malls. Back in the day, Nordstrom was a department store that was very regionally focused. It was based in Seattle or based in if not Seattle, somewhere up there in the upper Northwest. I think it was Seattle. But they had started to spread regionally, started to go into California, and they had a returns policy that took away a friction point for customers. And their returns policy was pretty much this. They'll probably dispute this, but this was the way as a customer I understood it. The returns policy was if you bought it from us, you can bring it back. And it was unthinkable at the time, truly unthinkable. The idea that you could go to Sears or someplace and buy something and actually return it without any hassle or headache or having to make a big case about why this wasn't the right thing or how it was poorly advertised or whatever, badly labeled. Nordstrom would just take it and say, here you go, here's your credit. Thanks for shopping at Nordstrom's. That was revolutionary. And they really did disrupt. They disrupted retail so much that these days the idea of returning something you purchased at the store is just a given. It's just a given.
Mm.
But back in the day, Nordstrom's made its sort of mark on the industry by being not just a retailer of higher end products, because that was also a distinguishing feature, but it was that they really cared enough about the customer that they didn't want to hear your story. They knew you were unhappy with something, and if they could fix it, they would, and they'd get it right. That was that was their whole that was their way of viewing a customer. Very customer centric. So you fast forward to what did Uber fix? I mean, I would throw that question back at you. There was some friction point that Uber fixed. What was that? I,
Easy, quick transportation in a city that doesn't offer cab or taxi services.
yeah, it could be that. I mean, you hear from a lot of taxi drivers. They say, "Hey, we've been waiting at the airport all." I mean, yeah, we've always been around. I guess they just got addicted to smartphones, huh? Well, no, not really. What it was that anytime you needed a ride, you could get one,
Hmm.
period. If it was at an
Yeah.
airport, sure. If it was at somebody else's place, but you not only could get the ride, you didn't have to wonder if somehow your ticket had gotten lost in the dispatch somewhere. You could sit there on your
Hmm.
phone and watch it, right? So they made it easier and completely disrupted that system. And I think if you're looking for disruption, you look for those pain points that the consumer has. And if I were in the power sports space, I'd say, where are those pain points? And that's going to be where your disruption is going to come from. And it doesn't, it may be, you may identify 5 or 10 pain points. I don't know. But that's going to be where the disruption comes from. Is it price? Is that it? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, you can make an argument that what's happening with the Chinese manufacturers is sort of serving as a disruptor. I don't know. But wherever those pain points are, I think, Kyle, that's where the disruption is going to happen.
It's awesome. Go ahead, Mark.
Circling around, you live in Austin. I lived in Austin for a while.
Yeah.
I'm personally, I'm glad that Austin is now in my rearview mirror. Not don't really love going back there, but I think at some point in time our paths probably crossed. You're a motorcycle enthusiast. I worked at Woods Fun Center. I helped that big store out on Breaker Lane,
Dude,
and
I've
you said,
probably bought a couple of bikes from you and you don't know it. But yeah,
yeah,
I used to go to
yeah,
Woods all the time.
yeah. It's funny how things like that work. And when in 2002, 2003. Woods had been acquired by a corporation or kind of a PE startup kind of deal. And they had a policy that every manager got 1 day a year to go out and do some external training. And I didn't actually do it. One of the managers that I worked with, Mike, actually went and took a day's course on how to use Microsoft Excel in the early days. And he came back and he was telling me about all the stuff that Excel could do. And, that really turned into something that I really enjoyed. And I mean, to this day, I use Excel to probably do way more than you legally should do with it. But, it's a great system. But, I tell that story because as part of that program that APS had, they also wanted us to read one book a year. And one of the first books that I ever read under that program was Good to Great. And I feel like, I've been a podcast enthusiast for a long time, and I feel like your Business Wars is really just kind of the current digital version of Good to Great. Did you ever read Good to Great? Was that a book that you
No, I
enjoyed?
know I'm familiar with Good to Great. I'm familiar with Good to Great, and I understand that it's a real classic. I wish I could say that I read that. Though there was a book on branding that I read a long time ago that I actually recently picked up again because I was interested in how well it held up. But it was called what was it? The 22 Immutable Laws of Branding. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book,
No, sir.
but it was a terrific book. And now it's dated, okay, because it was really, I think must have come out around 2002 or something. And I remember it was when I was working at Marketplace prior to the podcast. And I say it's dated because it doesn't really get the internet right. You can tell that they're still trying to figure out what the internet will add up to ultimately. But it had some really important things that have stayed with me over the years about branding, and that quite often it's hard for me to think about brands and not think about some of those lessons from that book. You care if I share a couple with you? I mean, is that all right?
No, go ahead.
One of them is this idea, it sort of takes you back to ground zero, and that's, what is a brand? What is a brand? And I think we all have an intuitive idea of what a brand is. And in a pinch, we can create a brand from scratch. But this book sort of broke down how brands kind of rose through history. And one of the things that it noted was, back in the day when you had Mr. Williams's Peppy pills or something, or some kind of snake oil, you would have Mr. Bill or Mr. Williams go out there in his carriage and he'd be making the big pitch. And it wasn't so much that you cared about the brand. What mattered to him is that he was selling you whatever it was. And as brands started to develop, what you were really talking about was a kind of a shift in marketing, away from the salesperson who has to sell you this product and convince you why this product is a good thing, to the product having its own ability to sell itself in a way. And you see this at the grocery store all the time. When you look at the brands, there's, dazzling array of brands, but there are only a handful that are real brand success stories, maybe Tide or something, But the ultimate brand, in a sense, is that brand that is so closely affiliated in the consumer's mind with what it is that they're almost synonymous. You know what those are, right? Band-Aids.
Kleenex or
Yeah, Kleenex, right? The lawyers, it's a brand that lawyers will hate, but it's a brand that a salesperson would love, or I should say, someone who's developing a product would love. Because in a sense, What brands do is the business of the salesperson. And one of the big predictions made in this 22 Immutable Laws book was how the internet would make brands even more important than ever, because that connection that you'd have with your customer would be severed by the online, disconnect, right? And that it was going to be more important than ever that you have a brand that occupies a particular space. And I that really has stayed with me, and it's been interesting to see how we've seen the rise and fall of brands that you would think would occupy the space, but they did something wrong, like pets.com, for example. Pets. What better alignment with the needs of animal owners could you have than pets.com? But of course, we all know that exploded. And one of the points that book makes is that quite often what brands mistake is they think that they need to grow their percentage of a market share to succeed, that's the game. But what this book kind of points out, and in a very deep philosophic way, is that that's not how great brands grow. Great brands grow by attaching themselves to a new segment, not by just simply pouring stuff out there. In other words, trying to think of how to do this. Think of a great brand that you know. I mean, I think of, for instance, Mercedes-Benz. Now, you could say that the segment it occupies is cars, but what does that occupy in thought the way that Kleenex and tissues do? It might be premium.
Luxury.
Right.
The experience.
Now, if you were inexperienced in your business, or you're trying to grow your business, the temptation might be that you've got to increase your market share in the car segment, if you will. Well, yeah, that's one way of thinking about it. But if you're brand focused, what you're going to be thinking about is how can I expand premium to other segments? Not how much more of this car segment I need to get. And so it's knowledge of your brand. In Mercedes' case, it's premium. Now, some people would point out that Mercedes sort of lost its way at some point, that they began to try to get more of that, car ownership space and not focusing on the premium as much as they should have been. And I think in the power sports space, we see this happening, especially in the big V-twin area, that there's a real concern there about the future of V-twins. And in fact, it's funny because I did a post on LinkedIn that I know that y'all responded to. Mark, I know you responded to it. And the picture there was of the new Indian chief. And I said something like, this is not just a bike. This is going to be a business school case study one day. Now, a lot of people thought and I went on to talk about the difficulties that Harley faces in this space right now, especially with its brand equity and everything. Powerful brand. And as we saw in the most recent numbers, Harley's now moved down to number 3. And there are a lot of projections that it's going to continue to slide, especially given its demographic. And I was talking about what Indian was doing here, that, and I was just seeing this online, guys. I was just seeing the reaction to the new Indian Chief Vintage. That was the bike that caught my attention. And it wasn't so much the bike that caught my attention. It was the reaction from not just Indian fans, but from Harley fans who were saying, why isn't Harley giving us this? Now, there's a good rejoinder to that. Don't get me wrong. Harley's got the Icon collection, and they've been doing this a lot longer than Indian has been doing it, in a sense, even though Indian's brand goes back a long way. The revitalization of Indian under Polaris and now with Carolwood, that's a whole nother story. Don't get me wrong. And I wasn't saying Indian's better than Harley, which is the way a lot of people sort of read what I was saying. What I'm saying is that they are competing right now in that big cruiser space. They're both competing for a smaller and smaller and smaller pool of prospective owners. And at that price point, $20,000 and above, you're talking about boomers that are aging out of riding altogether. Now what?
They're aching out of living.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is I know Harley's a huge company compared to Indian. I know Harley's got a lot of brand equity and certainly they have the resources and the infrastructure and the people to survive this. They're not going to go belly up, I don't believe. So don't get me wrong, but this is an inflection point for that big cruiser space. By the way, did you guys hear what the number one best-selling cruiser in America was? Maybe y'all can confirm this.
Well, I heard that the top motorcycle dealer in the country last year was Kawasaki.
That's it.
Not Cruiser, because I think that Kawasaki has a lot of small CC, don't really put them in sport bikes and dirt bikes and things like that. But yeah, I do believe Kawasaki is the top motorcycle brand in the country right now.
The,
You
the spin that I saw on it was that the Eliminator 500 was the best-selling cruiser in America.
Oh,
Now I guess by some measures, but clearly they're not in that Harley category. But it did make me think, Mark. It did make me think. Okay, well, Harley could just continue to sell very, very high-priced CVOs in that very high-end segment, but that's going to choke off here pretty fast, and you're just not going to have the buyers, right? And so what does Harley do if it is in a way the Mercedes of motorcycles? If they are the premium brand, what do they do? Especially now thinking that Harley has said that they want a $6,000 bike. What's that going to be? And it just got me to thinking, and I was thinking about the Chief, of course, coming out. And, look online at what a lot of Harley loyalists are saying about that Chief. And it's revealing to me that perhaps some of the assumptions that we've made about that market, maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're off a little bit. Maybe.
well,
Just maybe.
I had some questions about Indian that I wanted to go down. Kyle, since he kind of gave me a lead into my next question, you mind if I take the next one real quick?
go ahead. Absolutely.
So David, I didn't know you, and our buddy Robert Pandia had
Great
commented
guy.
on that post, and Robert and I have a good long-term friendship, and you had said something, I had said something, and I didn't quite recognize who you were until we had changed a few messages there, and then I was like, wow, Business Wars. I'm like, that's one of my favorite podcasts. I've literally made some of my employees at work listen to that podcast, and I'm like, this is really cool. And then you're talking about the new Chieftain that had been released, and
Well, Chief Vintage.
kind of yeah, it kind of has that vintage look to it. And, it got me to thinking that you in the past had done a Business Wars episode on Harley Davidson, not versus Indian, but Harley Davidson versus kind of the world at
The
that point
world,
in
yeah.
time.
Right.
And I was just wondering, do you think that maybe there's a Business Wars 2.0 case for a new Harley versus Indian episode?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned it because this, of course, the Business Wars team, we have producers, we have sound designers, and we tell stories. There are different kinds of podcasts, and what we do, we're storytellers, and so it's a narrative historical podcast, and we have some people who come on as actors, and I've got to do a lot of voice acting myself. So it's a bit of a different kind of podcast in that it's a narrative podcast, not so much back and forth talk. But we've got a team that I've got to convince. I've got to sell them on this being an important story, and I'm hoping to pick up on a lot of what you guys say to make that sales pitch to my team, because I've got to convince the producers and the editors that this is a story worth telling, and I think it is. I think it's a great story. The revival of Indian is a wonderful story unto itself. It's a great story, and it's not without its potholes either. And the more recent story of Harley Davidson, in a way, is not really reflected in that earlier version that you heard, Mark, about Harley versus the world. That was fine for then, but so much has changed just in a few years with what's happening at Harley. I think that I agree with you. I think it's a story that needs to be revisited and retold at this point,
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
mean, it's definitely a time of change. I mean, we're doing this the afternoon after Harley had their earnings call this morning, and
Oh,
it
I haven't
was
heard about that. How did that go?
not good, significantly worse than even the estimates on the street. So it looks like they're losing money in core operations and still throwing money at Livewire. If it wasn't for HDFS, they wouldn't have made any money. So yeah, it's tough times for Harley. But I don't want to hog all the interview here. So
So to
Kyle,
speak, yeah.
No.
You
I have a
used the word
question
Harley.
that
You used the word hog there, Mark. I'm sorry. I just
yeah.
picked up on an unintended slip there.
that's all right.
I have a
We,
question
we
that
we
I'm
make a
gonna
lot of mistakes. We embrace them.
we do
Good
that I'm gonna
man.
go a
Good
bit
man.
out of order here, but it ties into all this conversation. So, what happens to industries that rely too heavily on passion and loyalty instead of experience and efficiency?
I think you know the answer to that, Kyle. I mean, you got to have the passion. You just got to have the
Hmm.
passion. But, you can look at what's happened to the newspaper industry in a sense. I mean, there's a lot of passion there, but
Yeah,
but the knowledge, the depth of experience and all, there's no substitute for it. And there's no substitute for keeping your eye on the business ball.
hmm
Because I mean, in the end, those numbers are undeniable. You can tell stories a million different ways, but the numbers are gonna, that's gonna be your future. And
that's right.
there's just no getting past it. But yeah, I think that's an important point. But
Yeah,
having said that, especially in the power sports sector, it seems to me, and you guys know better, but it seems to me that it is very much powered by the enthusiasm that people bring to it. I find that in a few categories. Music is another one, and musical instruments, stuff like that, right? There's a lot of real passion. And what that passion is that's a shortcut to your customer. That's a way that you can really plug into your customer base and know what you're doing and whether it's right in their eyes. But at the end of the day, you've got to follow best practices in your business or you're not going to succeed. You
that's right.
got to know what's coming around the corner. And that's where the experience kicks in and the knowledge.
Yeah, I'm in the
I
automotive space as well, and I see a lot of differences in that piece right there from the auto guys and just efficiency and data. And in our space, power sports is a lot more passion driven. I mean, Mark have lots of conversations on this often, actually. So you hit the nail on the head, though.
I've given a lot of talks, David, and typically, we're seeing a lot of auto groups that are buying power sports stores right now. And I think, I've seen the financials on those on the front side and the back side. And, it's pretty consistent that when an auto group buys a power sports store, about 75% of the cases, they sell more, they generate more revenues, and they make less money. And it's typically because I look at automotive as transactional and I look at power sports as relational. And I think that a lot of times when those auto guys come into power sports, they try to run it like a car store, and that model just does not work here. And it's exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
When private equity doesn't have the best reputation in this country. And as we're talking about Indian, and next week we're actually going to interview Mike Kennedy, the new CEO of the Indian Motorcycle Company. So really looking forward to that and have some similar questions for him that I do for you. But, PE doesn't have the best reputation. A lot of times it is, we're just going to buy this company. We're going to load it up with debt. We're going to strip all the good out of it. We're going to leave a husk. We're going to let the investors, take the hit. And then we'll move on to the next thing where we can make a nice annual return. And, I actually have some ownership in an Indian dealership down the road from you in New Braunfels. And
Well,
Indian's a big piece of our business. I mean, it was 150 new motorcycles that we sold last year. And so
by the way,
we truly want Indian to be successful. But when news last year came out about Polaris selling off Indian to Carrollwood, we instantly saw a drop in customers coming through the door. We started hearing, a lot of, well, what's going to happen? What's the future company going to be like? Do we really want to buy one of these bikes? And then even recently, and I have not confirmed this, but it's just the rumor that's floating around that one of the executives at Polaris has essentially told some of his friends that, yeah, we just unloaded Indian onto Carrollwood. We gave them a bunch of money to do this. They're just going to run it into the ground, and there's not going to be anything left. And I don't know that's true. Again, that's just the rumor that's floating around. But it's created a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace. So, what are your thoughts about how PE is going to impact Indian now and going forward?
It's hard to know, of course, especially given PE's reputation, as you were talking about there, Mark. But there are certain things that I would say are win-wins, and you can't talk about all the bad stuff without considering the positives, and there are many. Number one, Mike, I think, is going to be a spectacular leader for Indian. They now get to talk about Indian as a standalone company and not as a snowmobile dressed up in motorcycle livery. That was always the thing that was hanging over Indian's head, was that, oh, you're riding a Polaris. Okay, I got it. It's funny. But
it was always tough when the Indian people gave you their business card that had a Polaris.com email address on it.
Yeah, stuff like that. For Polaris, it makes sense on a lot of levels, because it's important for them and for their brand to consolidate what it is they do. I understand that, and I think that's great. But I think the motorcycling industry owes Polaris a great deal of thanks for bringing back a storied brand. And I don't think that there's any desire on anyone's part to kind of deep six Indian. What they have done and this is unusual, by the way, in the PE space, I would argue. They have set this company up for success. They have a great lineup right now. And a lot of those people who worked on those machines are porting over with this purchase. So they're not starting at ground zero with nothing more than a brand and a logo. They're starting with a great lineup, a terrific lineup, a ton of goodwill in the consumer space. So to me, that's one of the things that distinguishes Indian, unlike, say, a lot of other times where you have these sort of spinoffs, and already the brand is suffering. It's been having to work its way back from some kind of crisis or something. That's not really what you're looking at with Indian. So with the kind of leadership that they have, with that incredible brand, with the bikes that they currently have in their lineup, and with the opportunity of building out that brand, to me, it's like the road ahead it's not going to be completely smooth, but the opportunity far outweighs the danger in my view. That's at least the way I see it. When I think about where Indian is right now, if this were KTM, we'd be talking about something different.
Ooh,
right?
Yeah,
That's a
different story.
That's a different story. But it's not. It's not. This is a brand that everyone wants to see succeed. And so, for my money, I think this is a wonderful time, and I can't wait to see what Mike does, what his plans are with Indian. Now, I will say something. I heard Mike do, and you guys could probably bore down on this a little bit more, but I heard Mike do a Q&A with one of the YouTube fan, channels, and one of the things that he was asked, and I thought that he avoided the answer to this question, but he was asked, what does he see about the future of Indian's lineup? And he sort of punted it back to, we've got a great lineup, and started talking about all that, how he rides a Scout 101 and all this kind of stuff. And that was great stuff, but he didn't really answer the question. And it may be too soon, since Carrollwood's takeover, it may be too soon to know how that lineup's going to be fleshed out. But, Indian did try something with the FTR, and it didn't quite take. But the bones of what made the FTR kind of a really world-class bike, and a kind of a real differentiator in motorcycling, that was there. So I'm also curious. I mean, when you guys talk, I'm going to be watching that podcast. I can't wait to hear what he has to say, if anything, about what he'd like to see with building out the sub, if there is such a thing, the sub $10,000 mark for Indian. I've been struck by what's happening with companies like Enfield, who have really been taking off, and especially the 500cc space and lower. I'm blown away, and I think the brand to look to for that, certainly Enfield, but Triumph and what they've done with their 400. And this gets back. This is why I keep going back to that idea of branding as being so important. You know, Triumph could have played this out as a kind of British Harley in a sense. But instead, what they did was they said, we're going to be an excellent British maker of motorcycles. Now, we both know that not all of their bikes are made in the UK. Okay, that's part of the dirty little secret that Triumph has to deal with. But Triumph has never hung its hat on made in Britain. They've always talked about designed in Britain. They've always talked about that heritage kind of thing and what Triumph made its riders feel like. Indian has a great opportunity here if they don't fumble the ball. But when they come out with, if they were to come out with, say, a 500 or a 400, it's hard to imagine, but if they were, I would hope that when they did it, they didn't position it as the starter Indian or the poverty version of the Indian or the learner's Indian. No, this has to be a flipping Indian. First and foremost, it's got to be a great bike, a desirable bike that even longtime riders would want. Have you seen those 400 Triumphs? Those things look great, and they serve a purpose in any experienced rider's garage. That's a great bar hopping bike. It's a great bike to go take on a back road. Those are cool bikes, and they look the part, and they don't feel like they're a subpar part of the Triumph lineup. So, and this is something I worry about when I hear about Harley Sprint. I think, okay, we've seen what happened with that. What did they call it? The Street Bob 500 and the 750. And those were very poorly built bikes. And they very much had the sort of this like kind of feeling when you went into the showrooms. They were set off in a corner, and that's where the salesperson would go to show you a bike with a Harley name on it if you just had to have your bike with a Harley name on it and you didn't have enough money to spend or you're a first-time rider. That was an embarrassment, I thought. I truly thought. So if Indian does this, do it right. Come out with the bike that Indian would make at that CC level. Not a starter bike, not a bike built to price. When I hear that stuff about we're going to have a $6,000 bike. Yes, I know they're building to price. That's the reality of it. But don't come out there with your marketing and say, this is your way into the Harley lineup as if, oh, one of these days I'll be able to afford a $20,000 Harley. Don't do that. Own that bike. Love that bike. Put it out front and say, this is a damn Harley that you can get for $6,000.
The nice thing here though is that, you know, Harley-Davidson and Polaris can't really play very well in that arena because they got to keep the shareholders happy first. And Indian now, not going to say that Carroll doesn't want to make money, but Indian now has the ability to play the long game where Polaris and Harley have never been able to do that.
Bingo. Bingo. That's great.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to this question before I ask it, but you're obviously huge on brand. It's very evident in this conversation. So do you think the next generation of riders will choose brands still or ecosystems?
This is that disruptor moment you were talking about, I think, because there's been a lot built into the brand loyalty thing. And a lot of that has been demographically, you know, I mean, you can look at the demographics and sort of see where riders are going to fit in. And I think now that's been being jumbled up a bit. Do you know of any riders who have gotten off of Harley and bought, like, say, one of those cool Enfields? I know several. And
we've seen quite a few of those people upgrade. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And now in the old days, when we were thinking about the old brands and where they fit in, we wouldn't think about that as an upgrade. We would think about that as like, oh man, you're selling low, right? I mean, you're getting on a small displacement bike after having ridden a Road King or something. Ooh, sorry, pal. But that's not the way that these riders are seeing it. For a lot of these riders, they're seeing this as an opportunity to explore two wheels in a way that they haven't done before, or maybe they haven't since they were a kid. And they're rediscovering the passion for motorcycling in a completely new way. And that's the key. That's the key here. It's that passion, tapping into that passion for riding machines, riding these two-wheeled machines, that is not so brand dependent, but more about that, the story that you tell about that spirit of adventure and about what it really felt like way back in the day when you first got on two wheels. Man, what was that like? Anyone who seizes that is going to have a terrific end, and they will become, if you're wanting to talk about brand loyalty, again, it's getting off of it's okay in the boardroom if they want to talk about the sort of brand ladder. That's okay in the boardroom, but it's not okay in the showroom. It's not okay. I would say own this bike and you will have brand loyalists, because they'll love that bike if the bike is built well. And yeah, I do believe that this is a chance. This is a chance for brands to earn a whole new level of loyalty from first-time riders, from people who are going to be entering this space and who have never ridden a bike before, people who are trying something new and want to experiment with something that they haven't been on in a while, or who've never been off a paved road and want to see what that's like. We're seeing this. We're seeing this happen in the low displacement adventure space already, right? With what is that CF Moto bike, the Ibex or something like that?
Ibex 450.
Ibex 450. The Himalayan is doing really well there in that space. Kawasaki's, no surprise, Kawasaki's entering that space too, right? This small displacement adventure bike thing. And this is addressing this fantasy of going off road and having yourself a grand old time and not having to lug up a big, a large displacement Panamerica or something back onto its wheels. This is something you can handle and something you can find out about your love for motorcycling, scratch that itch. That's pretty cool.
I talked about the shoot, I kind of lost my train of thought there. I know you've got a hard stop with time. I had one more question. I had one more point to make, and I think Kyle's got one more question. So one of the last questions that I had for you is that we have seen, not only in the power sports industry, but across this country in the last 20 years, that when CEOs retire out and they've got new executives that come on board, a lot of times these executives are not the people who know anything about that industry or the products or really understand it. And, I think that, those are decisions that are made to placate the shareholders and the investors. But they're not really, there to, again, talk about playing the long game and the short game. And, you think about Harley's recent CEO who left. He came from Reebok or Adidas or some shoe company. I wear cowboy boots, so I don't know how that works. But, he didn't know anything about the industry per se, and you kind of see what that did to that company over the last 10 years. How do you personally feel in all these companies that you've looked at? Do you think that it's potentially a positive or a negative that a lot of times the person who ends up at the top is not an enthusiast or understands that industry? I mean, today I've got, and I never want to come across as I know everything, that I can't learn anything anymore. But, I've got all of these vendors that we deal with who have 25-year-old kids who are coming in, and they've got a college degree and they spent 2 years in an intern program at the vendor. And then they think they can come in and tell me how to run my business. And they've never had to fire an employee before. They've never had to pay rent. They've never had to negotiate with a pissed off customer who bought a new unit a week before and now it's not working. So kind of a long story here, but how do you think about that disconnect that happens with a lot of these companies?
At the core of your question, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying about the inexperience and versus the experience, there's no denying that. But there are a lot of points in the life cycle of a successful company where you got to shift into second or third before you can throw it back into fifth. And I feel like sometimes when a board or when the leadership of a particular brand is looking out in the future, you can sort of see, okay, this is what's ahead, and we need a change. I think of someone like, for instance, I think of Artie and at Harley, and I know he has a lot of experience in the corporate world, Top Golf, I believe Pizza Hut, if I'm not mistaken. But you know what follows him more than that is his reputation as being customer focused, customer centered, and that really matters a lot to him. And if you think about it, there's not a lot that Pizza Hut and Top Golf share in terms of market space. And he was able to perform well in both of those spaces. In an enthusiast driven industry like power sports, obviously there's a lot, you got to go in with a lot of humility and a lot of willingness to learn. And everything that I'm seeing, he's there. I mean, he wants to learn, and he's owning it in a sense. And so for me, when you look at someone like Artie, you say, is this guy going to be good for the company? To me, it seems like a wonderful fit for this stage at Harley-Davidson. Now, this is not the days of Willie G and all of that for Harley-Davidson. That would be the wrong person, no matter how enthusiastic he was. That's not where Harley-Davidson is right now. And so in the life cycle of a company, is he the right person? And I don't know. But all signs point to, yeah, he probably is. So I guess the long-winded answer to your question about, how I see that is that in the life cycle of a company, there's going to be the right person, and you just have to think about what the company's needs are and whether or not this person can meet them or has a track record of doing it, and what their disposition is like, and whether they're willing to learn. Experience is hugely valuable, but it's valuable in its place. Yeah.
I remember what I was going to say too, and you were talking about the entry level bikes, and I was kind of talking about the long game and the short game. And I think, one of the other things that really needs to happen is that we as an industry for a long time kind of ignored that entry level rider, didn't have anything. And then, 10, 12 years ago, we started getting a lot of entry level bikes. But the problem is that the manufacturer has accepted the fact that they're not going to make a lot of money on that sale. The dealer still isn't full in on that. The dealer still isn't playing the long game and going, hey, I need to get these people involved in this. And it's okay if I take a skinny deal or I don't make a lot of money on it, because now they can play. And, on my LinkedIn page, probably 4 or 5 months ago, we did a poll on the new trophy just to kind of find out, how dealers were thinking about that. And, almost universally, people were pretty negative about that bike. And I think a lot of those dealers were Harley dealers. And I think they're looking at it from that single transaction not being a very lucrative financial transaction. And so why even play it? I mean, Artie, I think I agree with you. I think is probably the right guy today for what Harley-Davidson needs. But there's a lot of inertia that exists in their dealership showrooms right now. And if their salespeople don't start to embrace something new, in 10 or 15 years, if you want to sell something with a Harley-Davidson logo on it, it's going to be a dog collar or a t-shirt, because they're not going to make motorcycles anymore because nobody was willing to embrace anything new and try something different.
That's absolutely the truth. And so it does come down to having your sales staff on board. But you're saying something that's really, really deep and thoughtful and born of experience, Mark. And when you said earlier, and it's going to stick with me, that the auto industry is much more transactional and that power sports is much more relationship based,
Relational.
And,
Yes, sir.
And I think we all know that there is a gap between what's happening at the brands with the manufacturers and that lived experience in the dealership. There's a gap there. And whoever can close that gap so that the manufacturers and dealers are more in line and can stimulate excitement about the products that they're putting out there, especially for these younger riders, I think that they're going to be winners in this new world of two wheels. that it seems like we're fast approaching, you know? Uh, I don't think that there's a simple or an easy answer, but I do think that the more that you can close those gaps, the more that you can get your salespeople on board with tomorrow, the faster you can do that, the better. And the more that you can close these gaps between the manufacturers and the dealers, that too, it's going to be priceless, and it's going to be key to the way forward, I think.
Do you have anything else, Kyle?
A quick one. It might be a quick one, but we'll see.
I
Most underrated weapon in business today.
Oh man, the ear. The
Ooh.
ear. You gotta listen. You gotta listen to the people that
Powerful.
you can't stand to listen to. You gotta understand that there are people who don't see the world the way that you do. And if all you want to do is talk, like me, if all you want to do is talk and try to convince someone else, you're never going to go anywhere. The way for someone else to hear what you've got to say is to listen to what they've got to say. And you've got to be
Powerful.
sincere about it. You've got to be sincere about it. There's a reason that people believe what they believe as the gospel. You got to understand them. And you know what? You'll make friends that way too. And you'll expand your base. You'll expand your customer base. Wonderful things come out of listening to other people.
Tough in that tribal environment we live in today.
Yeah, really tough.
Last thing I had for you, I know you got a hard stop. You actually got to go do something to make some money here. But my grandfather worked for British Aerospace for 42 years, did design
Wow.
work on the Concorde and the Rapier, and I've always been an airplane enthusiast. I love, Dulles is 12 miles from my house, and I love going out and watching the planes fly overhead. But all the stuff that's happened with the 737 recently, would you have loved to have been on the ground in 1955 when that very first 737, or no, wasn't the 737, it was 707, when Tex Johnson came over the executives and did a barrel roll in a commercial airliner? What do you think people on the ground said when that happened?
Impossible. Impossible. Just impossible. We've seen so much change in our short lives on this earth, and I think particularly, Mark, you and I are probably closer in age. I'm stunned to think about how much change there's been just in my life, and I think of my sort of space here as the latter part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st, and it just keeps on changing, with AI and everything else. And yes, your question was, would I have liked to have been there? You know it, man. You know it. I would have loved to. I wouldn't have believed my eyes. And I think that's just it, isn't it? When we see things that we can't believe, it makes us think, what else is there? What other possibilities are there? It just opens up whole new windows, and we're seeing that happen all the time. And we might not even realize how profound it is when it's happening to us, sometimes. And I want to savor that more. I want to savor that. And I will say this one other thing. There are few places in this world where you can experience that sort of feeling of reflection and introspection, where you're thinking about who you are and where you are and what you're doing, than on two wheels. I can't think of any place I'd rather be when I'm thinking about these deep ideas than on a bike, and so I don't know. I'm jealous of what you guys get to do, not just in this podcasting space, but in the power sports space, because I think the future is very bright, and we're going to see a lot of cartwheels in the sky in the years ahead.
Well,
It's awesome.
I've been lucky to have my career in the power sports industry. It's been great for me and my family and most of my friends, and I can't tell you how honored I am that you on a text message on LinkedIn offered to come on our show. This has definitely been the highlight of my 2026. So short window of time there, but at least, kind of slide it in for your ego. So no,
That's very nice of
I,
you to say.
I literally, I've been looking forward to this ever since we decided that we're going to do it. And I hope that at some point in time, maybe you'll come visit us down at the dealership, or I can buy you dinner up in Austin at some point in time. But I'd love to meet you in person.
Mark,
And
I'll
maybe
take
you'll come
you
back
up
on again one of these days.
That would be wonderful. Thanks to you both. It's been a real honor and a privilege to get to be on the show. So thanks again.
Appreciate it, David. Thanks for being gracious with your time. Awesome conversation, and you have two big fans here, so keep doing what you're doing as well, because we love to follow and watch along too. So
Likewise, I'll be listening, guys. Take it easy.
Safe travels.
thanks.
Appreciate you riding with us on Raw and Unscripted. KSU. We'll be back next week with more ways to rev up your dealership success. Until next time, keep the throttle wide open. Wide open.